the Global Corruption Barometer report is one of the many reports that Transparency International releases annually, and these reports speak to different situations of corruption across the world, and particularly what we're here to highlight is the report on Liberia, Africa, but then narrowing it to Liberia. So we say 2019 July 11, and please also be aware that today is Africa Anti-Corruption Day. This day has been set aside by the African Union to highlight the issue of corruption or re-emphasize the need for African governments to fight against corruption. Transparency International Global Corruption Barometer 2019 report. Corruption on the rise in Africa pool as governments seen failing to stop it. Police, government officials, and parliamentarians or lawmakers rated as the most corrupt institutions in Liberia. The Center for Transparency and Accountability in Liberia, CENTAR, the national chapter of Transparency International, is pleased to release results of the 2019 Corruption Barometer report on Sub-Saharan Africa. The GCB, which is the Global Corruption Barometer, is a highly rated report produced by Transparency International that samples worldwide public opinions on corruption. In this year's Africa report, part of the Global Corruption Barometer, Transparency International partnered with Afrobarometer and Omega Research, which spoke to 47,105 persons or respondents across 35 African countries. The result shows that more than half of citizens, or 55%, think that corruption is getting worse in their countries and that their governments are doing a bad job at tackling it. Meanwhile, 23% think that corruption is on the decrease and 16% believe it remains the same. People living in DRC, constituting 85% of the respondents there, Sudan 82%, and Gabon 80% were the most likely to say that their governments are failing to deal with corruption, or corruption has increased over the last 12 months, or the 12 months preceding the research or the study. The percent of people who claimed that corruption has increased in Liberia stands at 47%, compared to Sierra Leone 43% and Guinea 62% respectively. In 22 out of the 35 countries surveyed, a large majority of people said their governments are performing poorly in the fight against corruption. Across the region, majority of the people, 59%, think that their governments are doing a poor job at handling corruption, compared to 64% in the immediate past survey. Only a third of the people, 34%, think that their governments are doing either fairly or very well at fighting corruption. However, in some countries, this is far more pronounced. For example, 87% of citizens in Gabon think that their government is failing to fight against corruption, followed by Madagascar 83% and Sudan 81%. Liberia is among the least performers in this category. About 60% of citizens in Liberia believe that their government is doing a bad job at dealing with corruption. By contrast, 64% of citizens in Sierra Leone think that their citizens is doing well, while 61% of those in Lesotho and nearly 60% in Ghana think that their governments are also not doing enough to deal with corruption. Citizens in these countries were some of the most initially, the first batch that includes Liberia were citizens that believed their governments were doing very badly. But the second category that Ghana falls under are people who were somehow positive about their governments making efforts to deal with corruption. In terms of sectoral corruption, citizens think that the police is the most corrupt public sector institution, with nearly 47% of the respondents believing that the police, some or nearly most of the police officers were corrupt or are corrupt. Many Africans also think that most or all government officials, parliamentarians, and business executives are corrupt, 39%, 36%, and 36% respectively. Citizens tend to perceive religious leaders, traditional leaders, and NGOs as cleaner, yet some citizens still believe that these institutions are somehow corrupt. Regarding the effects of corruption on citizens and their experiences, the results show that of those who had contact with key sectors such as education and health, 12 months preceding the research, 28% said they had paid bribes for services they accessed. It could be education, healthcare, electricity. This equates to approximately 130 million people across the 35 countries surveyed that paid a bribe in the preceding year. The Democratic Republic of Congo has the highest overall bribery rate, 80%, followed by Liberia, 53%, Sierra Leone, 52%, Cameroon, 48%, and Uganda, 46%. Mauritius maintains the lowest overall bribery rate, 5%, followed by Botswana, 7%, Cape Verde, 8%, Namibia, 11%, and Lesotho, 14%. The poor are more vulnerable to corruption, as they are more likely to pay bribe for basic services. 36% of people in this category said they have paid bribe, especially people who are poor, compared to 25% of well-off individuals. And the point here is poor people are more vulnerable to corruption. They are more likely to be exploited by service providers at hospitals and healthcare delivery institutions, and even in schools. So a lot more poor people paying bribe does not necessarily mean that they are corrupt or they practice corruption at will. It is because the system compels them to do that in a way. Imagine a poor person who takes his or her child to a hospital and that person is dying, and the health practitioner demands bribe. What would that person do? That poor person do? He or she would likely pay that bribe for that child to survive, because there's no other option they have. Apart from that medical center, which could be a public facility, they might not have the resources to go to other private entities. 68% of respondents fear retaliation. Those who say we will report corruption, we will be targeted, or nothing will happen, constituted around 68%. 53% of citizens believe that ordinary citizens can play a very key role in dealing with corruption. This is especially true in Swaziland, Gambia, Lesotho, where between 65 and 71% of people believe that their voices matter. However, far fewer people in Niger, DRC, Sierra Leone think that they can make a difference in dealing with corruption. This suggests that despite the negative trend, despite citizens believing that corruption is on the rise, they think that they can do something about it, which is something that we can leverage as media, as civil society, even government, to engage more with the fight against corruption, especially in Liberia. In Liberia, 1,200 respondents were targeted between June 2016 and July 2018. Many persons in Liberia perceive their public institutions as being highly corrupt, with the police, legislature, and businesses again tapping the list of the most corrupt public sector institutions, public and private sector institutions. Majority, nearly 60% of Liberians surveyed, believe that their government is performing very poorly in dealing with corruption. Additionally, 43% of public service users said they've paid a bribe in the last 12 months, and that the poor are more likely to pay bribe, 36% compared to 25% of their well-off counterparts. Also, many Liberians, less than 33%, believed reported cases of corruption would not be acted upon by authorities, despite a lot more, 52%, indicating that citizens have critical roles in dealing with corruption. So like we said, people are apprehensive. Liberians are apprehensive that when they report corruption, first of all, they will be retaliated against, or they will be targeted. Then second, when they report corruption, nothing will happen. This is not a good sign. And this disappointment is based on the fact that they haven't seen much over time in terms of concrete action to deal with corruption. Despite appreciable legal framework, as you may be aware, we have laws, we have institutions, different policies, and the legal framework. While it's true that what we have is not all of what we want, but we have appreciable legal framework that, if fully utilized, can take us to where we want to go in terms of dealing with corruption in Liberia. But again, despite these institutions, we still continue to be faced with the situation of corruption. And this is obviously disappointing that the LACC, Liberia Anti-Corruption Commission, General Auditing Commission, Public Procurement and Concession Commission, and even the Code of Conduct we have that requires public officials to declare their assets, incomes, and liability immediately upon taking office. These institutions and policies are either not supported fully or they are not implemented to get us to where we want to go. And in view of the above, and given the fact that we have all these negative trends, especially so citizens believing that not much will happen when you report corruption, or not much will happen if cases of corruption are identified, or in fact they don't think that their government is doing more to deal with corruption. In the midst of all of this, what can we do? And we're saying that the Liberian government must take steps to deliver on its anti-corruption commitment by scrupulously and impartially implementing existing anti-corruption laws and policies, including the African Union Convention to prevent and combat against corruption. The culture of impunity, which has seen many alleged corrupt persons go unpunished, must stop if government wishes to make concrete gains in winning the war against corruption in Liberia. Among other things, the Code of Conduct must be fully implemented and respected, and the proposed specialized code to deal with corruption timely established so that we deal with corruption in a way that the public envisages or we collectively envisage. Right now, cases of corruption are not prioritized. Actions to prosecute individuals are very slow, and we need much more robust efforts. By having the specialized code, or what others may call fast-track code to deal with corruption, we think with the requisite support, political will, obviously, we will get to where we want to go. Second, government must match its professed commitment to fight against corruption with concrete actions and deeds. Support to the Liberia Anti-Corruption Commission, General Auditing Commission, Public Procurement and Concession Commission, and other integrated institutions must be increased, and their reports given due consideration as important steps in efforts to concretely tackle corruption in Liberia. Also, the Whistleblower Protection Bill must be passed. We earlier highlighted the need for timely establishment of a specialized code to deal with corruption. This is one of the efforts that we need in dealing with corruption. Again, public integrated institutions, especially the heads, must be given the leverage to operate. When we implement the proposed bill submitted by the president or the executive to the legislature to make these heads of especially of these integrated institutions answerable to the executive or the presidency, we think by proceeding that way, it will undermine the independence of these integrated institutions and will eventually undermine the fight against corruption in Liberia. We are also recommending or saying that businesses and companies need to be transparent in their dealings, as corruption often thrives in a culture of secrecy but not just secrecy, but where there is a giver and taker. As you may know, bribery takes place if there's somebody that offers and if there's another person that takes. And in most instances, corruption that takes place in government is usually between public sector actors and private sector actors. So we're saying that businesses also have to do more to address corruption, because there is a supply and demand side. Lastly, citizens, civil society, and the media, as well as other stakeholders like religious institutions, must stand up and constructively engage government to promote and entrench the culture of transparency and accountability in society, especially in public service. Public debates on corruption must be sustained and anti-corruption efforts consolidated to reduce the incidences of corruption in Liberia. Ladies and gentlemen, this is our position. This is the latest Global Corruption Barometer report, especially highlights of the findings on Africa and Liberia. In a nutshell, corruption is on the rise on the continent. Citizens are apprehensive that their government will deal with corruption as they want it. Efforts to deal with corruption over time have not been substantive, they've not been concrete, they've not been impartial, and we need to get to a point where we are robust, we are impartial, and we are more serious about dealing with corruption. Political will has to be shown at the very highest level. The presidency, the legislature, the judiciary, and all the leaders we have, or the authorities we have that are overseeing activities and processes in the country, especially those dealing with promotion of good governance and fighting against corruption in Liberia, have to do more to concretely show to citizens that they are ready to fight against corruption, and that the public, the media, civil society, we all have very critical roles. We should continue to engage. We should encourage citizens. A lot more people have said that they are waiting or their actions can yield to results. What we need to do is to leverage that trend and engage with these people so that we can see reduced level of corruption in Liberia now and in the near future.